Thank you for joining the How CXOs Future-Proof Enterprise Data and Advanced Analytics Conversions webinar. I welcome Mike Meriton, co-founder and COO of the EDM Council.
Thanks, Yolan, and welcome everyone. So why are we here today? It's a challenging time, and CXOs are pivoting business models to reduce costs and better serve their end customers. At the same time, there are exponential increases in available data assets, along with significant opportunities to leverage cloud and new self-service analytics capabilities. Consequently, CXOs are now investing into forming dedicated enterprise data conversion practices inside their organizations. This allows organizations to capitalize on business and operational efficiencies and to gain enterprise insights, all while enhancing data and analytics environments. Therefore, today's panel discussion is entitled How CXOs Future-Proof Enterprise Data and Advanced Analytic Conversions. Let's get started with introducing our panelists for today. First, Fred Cohen, Head of Banking and Financial Services Industry at Intelliswift. Fred is a 30-year industry veteran serving Intelliswift's banking and financial service clients and working with CXOs and senior decision makers focusing on digital transformation, strategic innovation, business and technology solutions. Welcome, Fred. Our next panelist is John Bottega. John is the president of the EDM Council, and also I work with John. He's a partner of mine. John has the distinction as being the first chief data officer in the financial industry, starting with his appointment at Citi in 2006. John went on to be the CDO at the New York Federal Reserve and the group chief data officer at Bank of America. John joined the EDM Council full-time in 2014, and today is the president of the EDM Council. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mike.
Our next panelist is Peter Serenita, Chief Data Officer with Scotiabank. Like John, Peter is one of the early CDO leaders, having been the former group CDO at HSBC, and is also the chairman of the EDM Council over the last 6 years. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Peter. Stephen Hickson is the owner and principal with Sponic Systems, LLC. Stephen brings over 35 years of investment operations and back office expertise, including significant experience in software design, program management, and implementation. Welcome, Stephen.
Glad to join, Mike.
Good. Well, we have all our panelists introduced. Let's get going. So let me kick off the panel discussion or question. The first one, Fred, going to you. Our panelists will probably agree that companies are not satisfied moving data from legacy to on-prem or hybrid cloud destinations. They are demanding higher value add. So when you've been part of large-scale enterprise conversions and migrations, what are the most valuable attributes of methodologies? Fred, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Conversions used to be just focused on taking the data from the legacy environment and moving it quickly into a targeted environment so staff could go back to their business. But now, dedicated factory conversion teams get the value added in the middle of a conversion stream with analytics and accelerators and insights with methodologies like DCAM from EDM and populate them across the entire enterprise. Whether there's from M&A for acquisitions or migrating applications into the cloud or recurring conversions for new business, dedicated factory teams have only one mission: to make the conversions faster, cheaper, more accurate and efficient, and to leverage reusable conversion factory methodologies to share these accelerators across the enterprise.
Wonderful. Any of our panelists, maybe Peter, would you like to jump in on this question?
Yeah, no, I would agree, Fred. And, I think that I think we have to recognize that, there's a maturity involved here, right? Where, it's not unusual when you first do things to do it, with people in place and do it to the best of their abilities and whatnot. But over time, you start to develop a repeatable process, a methodology. And, so that really shows a degree of maturity as you continue to standardize and operationalize those types of things.
Good. Any additions around the valuable attributes of methodologies? Any of the other panelists want to chip in on this question? Okay. Peter, since you were just speaking, let me move on to a question for you, which is many enterprises across multiple industries have realized enormous value by executing enterprise data and analytic conversion factories versus the traditional ad hoc teams. In your experience, what are the key benefits between the two and what are the challenges?
Yeah, so this is almost like an extension of what we were just talking about. I think about these things in the same manner as I think about history a little bit, right? When developers were developing originally, it was a very manual, very ad hoc process. People were only as good as the people who were developing. And then we built the process, right? The software development lifecycle, and that standardized the way we do things. It really raised it to a profession, right? The same thing in data world, right? We originally had very ad hoc processes, and John will know this, again, having been one of the founders. But then we created a process, a methodology, DCAM, right, for that the Enterprise Data Management Council was endorsed and created and endorsed, right? So it then raises it to a professional, raises it to a repeatable process, and then you get consistency of outcome that way. And the same is true here in conversions, right? In the past, or say even maybe now in a lot of companies, it's done on an ad hoc-ish basis by the teams in place. But then when you add process and methodology to it, again, it raises the outcome. The outcome is more dependable and it's more efficient as well. I think so. So I think that's what you get out of it. I think the thing to be on the caution side is there is a degree of subject matter expertise required to do conversions, right? So you need this good balance between the standardization of the process, AKA the factory, and the inclusion of subject matter experts. You can't do it in isolation. You've got to do it with those subject matter experts to make it again, put the repeatable process in place, but also bring the subject matter to the factory on an as you hit each area.
Does anyone want to come in? John, any thoughts on this topic?
Yes, actually, quite a bit. So Pete, I think you hit it well. I think the key thing there is the subject matter experts, not only the subject matter experts in conversions, but the subject matter experts of the content that's being converted, right? We have a tendency to go, I'm going to take it from here and put it to there, and not look at what's inside the container, when in fact, maybe putting it from here to there is not what's supposed to be done. You need the business people to be involved in these conversions. And oftentimes that's not done. Technologists, and not to downplay technologists, but I'm just saying they'll move it, but where sans the expertise of the business.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, John. I couldn't agree more. And I think in the past, it was basically technology taking the lead because people would advocate that responsibility, right? So technology would say, okay, we've got the ball, we'll run with it. But you're absolutely right. There's a requirement. There's a not only a requirement, but there's an obligation by the business to provide that subject matter expertise.
Well, gentlemen, one idea around this is when I hear the word process, I think in frameworks, I think repeatability. And of course, if it's based on best practice, you raise the bar of the entire outcome. On the other hand, when I think about analytics, there's an element of creativity and an opportunity for new opportunities to be generated. And I could easily see someone making the argument that a framework or a process might take some of the creativity opportunities out. How do you balance the two? And Paul, I was thinking maybe you might be someone who could weigh in on that topic.
Sure, thanks a lot, Mike. I think you're hitting on something very important, as did the other panelists, which is, first of all, when you're doing these conversions, you're doing them for a purpose. And the purpose is to get to a place that is better than where you are today, of course, not just on new technologies, but new capabilities. And so I think one of the things that's important is that as you're doing these conversions, it's not viewed as a very, an enormous project that has a beginning and an end 2 years later, but you're starting to put a new process in place. And the benefit of a framework is it gives you certain thresholds or certain handholds for you to hold on to and make sure that you're observing the principles that allow for interoperability, that allow for transparency between different processes and different stakeholders who are accessing that data and using it in new ways. And ultimately what that turns into is not just automation, but the basis for collaboration. That is the insights that you gain, the ability for you to start harmonizing that data. It should be that you're simplifying at the end of conversion, that you have a target of your data that even though it's growing in different areas, the core metrics on your business, the core facts on your business are used and reused as opposed to replicated all over the place. And so I think the key thing is to understand where the data is going, thinking about it as an end-to-end pipeline that includes the analysts, includes the insights of those SMEs and the business users in the design of this. And that's why it's fundamentally not just a technology initiative.
Great. And Paul, any thoughts on how do you unlock creativity while following a process?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you have to design the creativity into the process. And so one of the things, when we're thinking about where this is going is that, as you move from the traditional waterfall and the traditional ETL, what we're seeing that conversion factory methodology becoming is ultimately a basis for what we call data ops, which is like DevOps, which is continuous release, continuous evolution, expansion, and simplification. And the fundamental keys there are that you have a framework, that if you look hard at the DevOps methodologies, testing, data quality monitoring, data alerting is built into all of the data transformations and KPI metrics and whatnot to say, hey, this data stream is out of whack for some reason. And it's not just an operational issue, it's a semantic or a business issue. Is it material, what you're finding out of whack? So if you don't have a framework, you're kind of going back to that earlier comment of handcrafted code, where all the thinking is buried in code. And by having a framework that exposes it in metadata and in rules and in model-driven design, you start to expose that and you can scale it out and operationalize it.
But Paul, you need the impetus to make it happen. And what I'm referring to, and I've seen this, where mergers occur and go down to the operations floor 5 years later, and everybody still has their acrylic cube of their original company name on their desks because they've never converted the systems, they've never combined the databases. And I think that's also the opportunity for creativity, right? Because when you think about that, that's where you now say, well, do I need 2 of these or 3 of these, or, and that spawns it. Too often it's just a physical move of stuff, and then nobody cracks it open to see what's inside.
Well, and our bugaboo has always been silos, and M&A can always create silos. So I think part of it is looking at your business processes and saying, where are you going to get a benefit from a consolidated or integrated view? Let's just say of your entire supply chain, from parts coming in, manufacturing, and then distribution and sales. And if you've got a lot of different silos and you can't see across them, you're not going to get those benefits that come from being able to do better supplier management, pricing, and optimization across your supply chain. So I always think of it as not just some IT savings, but actually the business efficiency, effectiveness, and agility.
Yeah, good points, Paul. Anyone want to add before we move on to this next question?
Yeah, Mike, I just add just to kind of pile on a little bit, I guess, but the linkage between subject matter experts and IT staff in a conversion. I think we have to remember that a data conversion is not just all data conversion. There's also, if you're taking data from system A, which is the source, to system B, which is the target, they may process data very differently to whatever the outcome. If it's an accounting system or, in my world, securities processing system, and so forth, they may process things very, very differently. And that all has to be determined before you start the data conversion, because there may need to be a transformation that takes place in the middle. And that has to be figured out. The business people may explain what it is, but a combination of business and IT people have to figure out how to solve for it.
Yeah. Stephen, I just look at the video cameras and I see 3 head nods. That's great. Hey, so next question, John, I'm going to frame this one over to you, which is M&A in the banking and financial services sector can be an incubator and an accelerator of data and analytics conversions. New insights, new efficiencies can emerge with new businesses and innovation. What are your experiences with M&A and enterprise data conversions? And do you think we're entering a phase of a business cycle where this will increase or decrease the demand for scalable enterprise data and analytic conversions?
Mike, I guess to kind of reiterate what we just said, it's the experience of M&As where they don't do this, miss huge opportunities to inject efficiencies, correct the wrongs from the past, so to speak. What I find interesting, and I offer this to my other colleagues on this panel, when an M&A is being considered, they'll look at everything about whether it's valid for those two entities to join. I never see any analysis done on the data or the infrastructure side of it. It's usually after the firms merge, then all of a sudden there's this frantic kind of chicken with head cut off, combine this database, combine this customer, and it's done after the fact. I mean, I would love to see this as part of the preliminary analysis that's done when M&As are put forward. So I'd like to see this happening more. Clearly has to happen more. And as our data breadth changes and issues of data efficacy and things like that come into play, I think we have to do this before we allow mergers to occur.
John, if you don't mind me adding a case study to that, about 5 years ago, I was working with a pharmaceutical company that wanted to build a data lake. And think about a data lake as basically a data conversion, right? It's just another kind of analytical platform. And as they were bringing in the data, they started to get these synergies across it. But I'm going to fast forward a few years. They actually ended up with enough information, especially real world data, patient EMR records and patient populations and efficacy of drugs and their marketing and sales networks, that they had a simulated population. And our sponsor told us that they'd start using it. They had started to use it in M&A, and that they were able to build a model of cannibalization and penetration and potential pricing for acquisitions that they were considering. And these are huge acquisitions. These are billion-dollar acquisitions, right? So, and for them to have that precision of view was a complete competitive advantage. And they felt like they made their money on the deals they didn't do because they could see the data and say it wasn't going to be accretive to our business.
Mike, I have to say, so one of the questions that came out said, look at systems before M&A, surely you jest. So, yes, I agree. It's a hard thing to believe that it needs to be done. But Paul, I think you've just pointed out there's a financial and economic financial benefit to doing that, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually, I know we have all heard the phrase a data-driven culture or data-driven organization. Paul and John, what I'm almost hearing is a data-driven M&A cycle.
Right.
And John, instead of making it the afterthought, I'm actually, Paul, with your use case, that was how they made their decisions.
Yeah.
And that approach, which is if you combine two entities together, how will they operate at a data level could be the differentiator on the success of that M&A activity.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'm going to make two quick points if I could. I think more and more we're starting to see, maybe not in the banking industry quite yet, we're starting to see mergers or acquisitions for data content. Right?
Yeah.
People's data is being valued as a valuable asset. So you're going to find someone buying a company for its data, right? So I think that's the first point. So clearly having understanding the asset at a company that you're either going to acquire or merge with is becoming more and more important. And then figuring out how are you going to be able to leverage that in a cost-effective way. Obviously, it comes into your M&A equation. I think that's the point you're making. I completely support that. The other point I wanted to make is a historical point, another use case, Paul, if you will, right? Back in my early days, we were part of a merger, but it was our first merger. The company we were merging with had done multiple mergers. Okay, it was a bank, and what you saw was that the credit, especially the credit group in that other company, they knew the playbook, right? We were like, huh? What do I do now, right? And they were like, okay, we all have to get the common customers. We have to merge them together. We got to look at the exposures. We got to look at, and so again, it wasn't as formal as a conversion factory. I think that was maybe a precursor to a conversion factory, but just witnessing the fact that they had that playbook and they knew what to do, put them light years ahead of us.
Exactly. Good. Let me, Stephen, a question for you. You've worked extensively with large and small firms using advancements in reconciliation. As your company continues to achieve significant growth, what are some keys to reconciliation that enterprises should consider leveraging to be more efficient at scale? And what are some of the new technologies that could benefit larger enterprises in the context of these conversions at scale?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I've been involved in reconciliation for much longer than I want to admit. But it has started to evolve. I mean, historically, reconciliation systems were the ugly stepchildren of an organization that they're not revenue generating. Obviously, nobody, in my mind, nobody paid a lot of attention to them. A lot of reconciliation activity was done in Microsoft Excel, and unless it's done in a large scale. And then there's a few large firms out there that are very focused on it, probably industry specific. They're not very flexible, hard to manage and configure and so forth. So, I think a lot of the reconciliation systems you see now, though, at least in the investment operations industry where I play, have added a lot of functionality. And I think it really, they've added things like machine learning. My firm particularly, I mean, we offer reconciliation tool as one part of what we do, but we've taken like a data agnostic approach, right? So we do not make our reconciliation system specific to an industry. We primarily sell to the investment operations world, but we just went through a whole analysis with a healthcare firm who wanted us to help them with their billing and accounts receivable process. So I think that's one thing that you need to see in reconciliation. I think the other big thing is you need to put the power in the hands of the user, right? So historically, if I wanted to make a change to a reconciliation tool, which happens consistently, you need to change configurations, tolerances, the data you're taking in is constantly changing. You had to go back to the development team and have them make changes to it. And it just slows the whole process down because inevitably that development team has a queue. And you could be waiting 3 to 6 months to get some kind of a minor change done. So the more power you can put in the hands of the user, and I think that's happening with the newer systems, I think that's the better thing to do. I think having some component of machine learning as well. I mean, reconciliation, the comparison of 2 or more sets of data, machines can learn now. They can learn now. You have certain criteria that you're defining usually up front in the configuration process when you say, I want this security to equal this security, and I want that to reconcile. But nowadays, when you get into things like swap contracts or the derivative contracts, at least in the investment world, that's what I can speak to most clearly. There's no standardization. There is none. So you need to figure it out as you go. So we've incorporated a lot of machine learning in our process to come up with what we call suggested reconciliation items. I think this item goes with this. It maybe needs to be one more step of verification, but this is really the way. This is really how these items should go together. And then one final thing that I think is happening once again, more focused in the investment industry, and maybe other people can comment in other industries, is the advent of unstructured data, as we call it. So in the investment world, many of the institutional investors that drive a lot of the investment, they're invested in alternative investments, private equity funds, hedge funds, and so forth. And there is absolutely no standardization here. You don't get a nice structured file from a big bank or a big broker or whatever. You get a PDF document. It is in 1,000 different formats. It's whatever that person decides to do. It's probably being generated in Microsoft Word or Excel initially. And you have to be able to take that data in. And there's a lot of tools out there where, on the internet, you can find, 100 of them that will extract the data and they'll leave you with a pile of data that might not be clean. It will have extra characters in it. It's not usable. So to really, be able to handle unstructured data, I think is something that all the reconciliation systems have to take into account nowadays. And I think we're starting to.
So Stephen, I'm going to ad lib on this one. This is an audience question that's, and in my mind, very related to reconciliation. And it's from Reggie, and it goes as follows. I am hearing you talk about repeatable process, but my experience working in a large bank that has done 4 or more large migrations in the last 5 years is that it is far from repeatable. There are data quality issues and target data model challenges that vary every time. What are your thoughts on that particular topic? Obviously, in my mind, that raises reconcilement issues potentially. That might be one of the key enablers to speed up the integration. Any thoughts?
Right. And I think it's a valid question. I don't think that's going to go away. I don't think that's going to change at all going into the future. So what you have to do is build your tools to accommodate that. Right? So I think you need to have the flexibility to be able to retrieve the data or retrieve data sets and do that data transformation. I mean, when we talk about reconciliation, I'd say maybe more than 50% of the reconciliation process is the collection of the data and the transformation of the data before it goes into that reconciliation tool. I think you can make that argument for any of these systems. And even if you don't reconcile, which I wouldn't suggest, but even if you went from system A to system B, there's going to be a data transformation process in there. And the easier you can make that, and this goes back to my comment about putting the power in the hands of the user, right? To have intelligent tools that allow the user to transform their data is just, I think, a very powerful thing and a much more efficient way about that.
Good. Good. I'm going to frame this next question, Paul, over to you. How does business intelligence drive innovation of enterprise data and analytics conversions, particularly around business intelligence using structured versus unstructured data? And what other new advanced technologies that enterprises should be aware of?
Thanks a lot, Mike. I think there's a couple things at play here. One of the things that I'd like to just come back to is the role of the SME and now the intersection and interaction with machine learning and AI technologies. A couple of years ago, we were working with a bank that wanted to democratize the access to its data lake. And it turns out that the SMEs needed to tag PII data and sensitive data. The SME hours was a huge bottleneck. It was going to take well over a year or two of a team of people going through and trying to manually tag things. And we used some of that technology to allow us to identify areas of data and methods and standards that we could apply to that data to expose the access to the data sets themselves without exposing the sensitive data. And so this now, I think, augmentation of human intelligence with rules and ML and AI tools are going to allow us to open those things up. I think, as we were just talking about, even doing some of that with unstructured data is going to allow us to see data as we're doing these migrations that we didn't really have access to see into before. The second thing I'll say is that I've always had a policy of what I call catalog first, which means start with an analysis and use data profiling and use analytics to understand what the content of the data is more from the bottom up than from a metadata library or a glossary. Like, look at the values and say, oh, these are ICD-9 codes, or these are Swift codes, or whatever that would allow you to identify quickly the kinds of data you're getting, whether they're coming from spreadsheets or databases or whatnot, and then reconcile or analyze that with others. And finally, what I'd say is important in the analytics space here is that the analytics is an end-to-end process, right? So you've got your data pipelines, but they're feeding into intelligence processes. And as businesses increasingly use those to make decisions, the decisions they make off of those are more data. So you really have to build a data fabric, an open environment where data from all of your activities, including these new machine learning and AI and insight-driven technologies, those results can become fodder for more and more exploration and innovation.
Great. Anyone would like to add in to Paul in your comments, Paul?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is I think I completely agree with you. You need to do the analysis of that data. I think, and I'm speaking more from the business side, I consider myself a business person. And I find it, the way that I look at data is significantly different than the way, like my partner, who's more technical, the way he looks at data. He's looking at it more from a pattern and a logic standpoint. I'm looking at like a list of securities and thinking, oh, this is how this one works, this is how that one works, what the differences are from an accounting and processing standpoint behind them. He's looking at the data set and looking for the patterns and so forth. I think that's something I've learned over the past 4 or 5 years, even that really has kind of hit home with me, and I'll always confer with him then when we're looking at a complex issue and say, how do you see this?
Well, even more so, he should be conferring with you, because oftentimes the data quality issues we find in the IT world, we see the data and we say, well, it looks pretty consistent. I see the profiles or everything. And you look at it and you say, this doesn't make any sense, right? Trade, there's no way this trade ever happened with this company, right? Or whatever, because you know the market. And I think that multifaceted look at the data for quality is really important. It speaks to how hard it is to build real data quality frameworks that are not just technical data quality, but they actually have the semantics.
And Paul, to that point, oh, I'm sorry.
John? Go ahead, John. Go ahead.
Okay, and I was going to say, Paul, to that point, the application of data scientists into this mix. We often think of data scientists as, oh, they're sitting up and they're thinking of all sorts of, rocket ships to the moon and that kind of stuff. When the reality is their skill set applied to things like this, data quality, really understand, I like your bottom up analogy, right? To really look at the data. I mean, I've seen this myself. We took in feeds, just a quick use case, of millions of mortgages, and one of the attributes was owner occupied, and the traditional way it looked, oh, they were all ones or zeros. Turned out all 6 million of them were zeros. Well, that's, you need to look at it multidimensionally, and same is true before if you engage in a merger, you've got to apply the skill sets of a data scientist to think through this, where the opportunities are to merge some of the data. Maybe there's opportunities that you wouldn't have found in a traditional way if you do that deeper dive. So there's a skill set I think you need to bring into the game as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. I'm going to add another question in from the audience. This is from Christopher, and I think they'll be clamoring for answering this particular question. I'd be interested in hearing thoughts from this panel on how a clear corporate data strategy that should be the guiding current and future data architectures should be at the driving force behind data migrations and modernization initiatives. Would anyone like that?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in.
Go for it, Peter.
I loved it. I love this, Christopher. Well done, right? Because when I saw that come up on the chat screen, I was like, yeah, definitely. I think there's no question that a company that has their what I call their data act together is much better positioned to do this kind of conversion, acquisition, or whatnot, because trying to put two messy houses together is a lot harder than trying to get put something onto a stable house. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that anyone who has a clear data strategy and execute against that is 100%. Nobody will be 100%, perfect, right? But you're certainly leagues away, and you have such a jump start on where you need to be, that the problem statement is a lot, I won't say simpler. Simple isn't the right word to use, but it does make your journey a lot shorter, because now you know what your target is, and you've well defined it, you've documented it, you've got your metadata all set up, you've got your quality parameters all set up, and now it's a question of saying, okay, how do I get that thing over there to look like this thing over here, or to merge into this thing over here, as opposed to trying to define both sides of that equation at once. So I think any company that has gone on that journey or is going on that journey is definitely in a much better position to perform these kind of conversions. And the other point I wanted to make is we're talking about these conversions like they're only have to do with M&A, right? And M&A comes around, but they don't come around that often. So if we're only doing this for M&A, you probably don't have a huge business case. But these conversions actually are much more than M&A. In fact, parts of our business, let's say security servicing, fund administration, their client acquisition model is about getting data from their clients. Not, when they acquire a new customer, it's getting their portfolio up into the administration unit and, administering their funds or doing their fund accounting. So that's part of their business acquisitions. It's part of their business model, right? So going back to the main point is that this thing now starts to get leveraged, again, beyond M&A, but also this goes back to that repeatable process. And if you have a good data management or data strategy, well done.
Well, Peter, I'm also,
Mike, if I can jump in, I would extend that, Peter, to something we're actively working on right now, and that's cloud migration.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely, John.
Here, we're seeing the fundamental best practice is data management, right? Don't just move data from on-prem to cloud, analyze it, modernize it, and pick all the adjectives you want. But the point is, don't reproduce what's on-prem on cloud. What's the point? You want to introduce innovation. You want to introduce these things, and that goes to a standard process with good data management principles.
hey, gentlemen, I'm almost hearing that a good data strategy is your competitive advantage on both M&A and any internal leveraging of your data assets. In other words, if you have your North Star figured out, it's easy to bring other firms to align to it. If you don't have that organized or figured out and adopted by the enterprise, you're going to.
I would say, Mike, that's the foundational piece, and then you layer that with the expertise of mergers and conversions and that. So once you start threading all of those skills together, that's what enables you to have a successful conversion activity.
Yeah, so Stephen, a question for you. You've been involved in quite a few large-scale enterprise conversions. What's your take on what are the best practices that you can apply to those kind of conversions across the enterprise?
So I have been involved in a number of very large conversions, working with large custodian banks, working with investment management companies, and I wish I had seen a bunch of best practices that were consistently applied. But I think the best practice, and I think people will laugh at this, is you use Microsoft Excel and you tend to throw bodies at it, and that's just being perfectly blunt. That's been my experience, and I think. But I think there's obviously room for significant improvement. I think a lot of the things we've been talking about here today, the last conversation that we just had there about, the data consistency, having a data management process in place. I'm kind of in the back of my mind laughing to myself because I really have never seen that, a good data management strategy in place, right? Maybe that's a thing that people have been talking about it for years. And maybe it's just, something that, I've seen more in the investment industry, but there's so much data and it's really, not something that where there's a consistency, in almost all the data conversions, whether it's converting, from one system to another within the same organization, just like changing accounting systems or processing systems, securities processing systems. Or whether it's an acquisition. I was involved in one of the bigger acquisitions of one of the biggest custodian banks in Boston, and the state of the data, I guess, to put it that way, the state of the data that you're taking in from a company you're acquiring. My experience has just been, you can have lots of issues. There's lots to clean up. Right now, my company, we're in the middle of two different onboardings, I guess, onto our software platform. And we're spending a significant amount of time almost like cleaning up the firm's data, as we go. And it's something you don't always take into account when you're pricing it and the amount of time you have to spend and the implementation and so forth. I think just getting back to the point, or getting back to the question, the best practices would be you need to clean up your data. Right before going through a conversion process, what a firm, what a firm should do is clean up their data as best they can, make it consistent. I think you need to have reconciliation functionality in place as you're moving any data from system A to system B. It has to be reconciled, between the two. I think the flexibility of the tools you're using for the ETL process, the transformation process, especially. Those tools have to be flexible and put as much functionality in the hands of the user So you're not taxing your IT department as you're taxing them as little as you possibly can. I think those are the key things. And I think like Paul brought up a little while ago, I think to combine your business subject matter experts with your IT department, the people that are looking at the data from two different perspectives, I think that it's just very helpful. And that's something that I've just become a fan of over the past 4 or 5 years. I didn't realize that before. And I would always think as the business person, I knew the data better than the IT person. He was just there to assist me. That's not the case. You need to get their input up front.
Thanks, Stephen. Question, Paul, for you. And I think I missed this one from a little bit earlier, but what are the transformational strategies to uncover the data analytics from conversions to produce the best operational efficiencies for the enterprise? In other words, how would you advise clients to find those jewels of opportunity?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a couple things that I mentioned here. One is that I think that you use analytics, you use everything from your existing reporting and modeling infrastructures that use data. You use kind of the consumption layer of how are people using data and what insights are they going after, to get a sense of how to scope and prioritize what the conversion should focus on. And I do think that a lot of conversion efforts, if you think about the magnitude of time and effort and money spent, scoping is really critical, delivering value as quickly as you can and effectively, but also ending up with a better spot, as Peter was just saying, than where you started. So you're starting up with consistent and a more complete version of data that comes together. Now, analytics, I think, can tell you a lot. You can apply advanced BI and machine learning to identify data quality issues. We have invested a lot in automation to translate and map data from legacy source systems like SAP and others into more open analytical frameworks for use more broadly. And I think automation and analytics can go together to help you scope and focus on what you're going to deploy and how you're going to deploy it. But I want to add on one other thing here, which is this question about data strategy. And I want to talk to that because I think everyone agrees that data strategy is the way to drive this. And again, all I'm saying is you can use some analytics and automation to follow that strategy. But what I'm starting to see is new strategies emerge that are being driven largely from the business that include a big focus on democratization, a big focus on self-service. And this is something that my entire career has gotten people nervous. I don't want users going in and getting data themselves. I want them to ask me so they don't screw it up, right? But the reality is this is where we're going, and it means you need to embed the information about what the data assets are that you have, appropriate use. You need to give guidance. It makes governance more important because now if you've got a catalog out there, people can shop for their own data. You need to give them some guardrails and guidelines as how to use that. But in the end, the companies who are doing this well are getting better collaboration. And they're even investing in an area called data literacy, which is just getting the entire workforce to know how to work with data and analytics to make better decisions.
Paul, I'm almost hearing in those final remarks that there are sort of two things you need to worry about to honestly get the most value. One is there's a technical set of assets and frameworks and self-service capabilities, but there's also a training that needs to be done to construct and create an awareness and an acceptance and support for self-service analytics and a literacy around people making decisions based on data-driven decisions as opposed to gut feel or incomplete data. Is that what you think is part of the requirement to really pull this off?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we actually developed a nonprofit called dataliteracy.org that is focused on training employees to become more comfortable with decision making. But I want to come back to one thing, which is even as opposed to gut feel versus analytics, even across the analytics spectrum, there's not a one size fits all. You will have a governance policy and assets available to data scientists who know the responsibilities of what they're dealing with that you won't give to your average factory worker because they don't have the same skills or they may not have the same needs or whatever. But that there's a continuum there, and you need to be both agile and controlled and governed. And that's where I think we are heading, with a more data literate workforce that's able to use this data more effectively.
Great point, Paul. Anyone want to chime in on that? And I'm going to start moving to some of our final questions at this point. Any thoughts? Okay. Peter, a question for you before we do some key takeaways across all of the panelists. You too, you've been involved in large-scale enterprise conversions. And if you think of the things you have to focus on to do them successfully, you have emerging technologies, you have methodologies, and you have the team. How do you prioritize those three main areas, and what advice would you give to our audience that might be involved in some of these activities?
No, thanks. And those, as you might surmise, right, those are not mutually exclusive things. It's really then a balance, right? And I do think that there's always dangers in each one of those, right? If you over process, if you make the process very onerous, the methodology very onerous, it's self-defeating to some extent. But if you make it too light, then quite frankly, you're not providing the level of repeatability and governance, right? And then the question on the team, are they skilled in terms of both the process and the tooling? And then that does lead to the technology, right? Because again, these are so intertwined. And like anything, you want to continue to advance your capability, but you need to do it at a pace that you're not outpacing yourself. You don't want to change the technology every week, right? Every time you're doing a conversion, then you lose that leverageability in that process repeatability and the leverage that you would get. By the same token, you don't want to be stuck in that same technology forever. So it's always this balance between, when do you introduce a new technology or a new capability? And I think if you always have kind of two frames of mind, one is the immediacy of we need to get these things done. And so that's tending to make sure that your team is skilled in the process and the tool and whatnot. But you also have constantly looking on the marketplace for some of the advances in technology and dedicate I won't say a small part of your team, but at least some time to constantly kind of examine and POC that stuff. And then you can make the determination of if it's worth the time and effort to change your current process and technology. And that has to be done in a very considered way. It's not just, okay, we're going to throw that in next week and we're off and running, right? So all of it's part of your standard change management, whether it's this process and technology, or if it's just any other technology that you're introducing into the company or process changes that you're introducing. It's a change management process, but you just can't sit there saying, I'm really happy with my process, I'm really happy with my technology, so I'm done, right? We have to constantly grow and improve. And so it really is that kind of balance between those three important factors.
Agreed. Anyone want to add to Peter's thoughts? Okay. So gentlemen, to sort of bring this webinar towards a conclusion, it would be great if you could recap some takeaways for the audience. And I'll use the analogy of the magic wand. If you had to wave a magic wand and construct something that would create efficiencies and conversions and deliver the highest value to the operation, and listening to all the comments of this particular webinar, what would be the takeaway you would give to the audience that they could bring back to their company? And I'll start first, Stephen, with you. Do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think, when we talk about conversions and the data conversions, for whatever reason, I think I think companies, especially larger companies, kind of look at them as kind of one-time events, right? They're events. They're not ongoing operations. And I think people would love to say, oh, there's an entity out there, not just your general consultants who would just kind of bring in bodies and whatever, but there's a group out there that has a methodology. They have the right toolkit. It's like a carpenter coming to build a house with a hammer and a screwdriver. It's an entity that has all the tools, flexible reconciliation tool, a data conversion tool, ETL, all that stuff, as well as some subject matter expertise. It doesn't maybe have to be in the specific discipline like investment operations or healthcare or whatever the industry is. I mean, that's probably helpful, but at least people that understand data, They can look at data and make sense of it, like I think a lot of us have been talking about, and then bring it, standardize it, do the conversion, do the reconciliation. And I think if there was a group that specialized in that, that would be very helpful. I think it would be very helpful to a lot of organizations. I have to take my existing resources, have them, do this process, this conversion process, in addition to their day jobs, which you know how that goes. And it's just going to elongate the process, whatever. So I think that'd be very helpful.
You're on mute, Mike.
John, do you want to comment at this point?
I was reading your lips. I knew you were talking to me. So,
No problem.
so I'll be real quick. First of all, I would like to think that the magic wand isn't the magic wand. I think it's achievable. And the way to do this is real simple. Creative and innovative business processes combined with data literacy and effective technology infrastructure. You bring all those three together, you're going to achieve this. We have a tendency to have a gap somewhere in that, and then the whole thing falls apart. As Peter said, the arrows go in all different directions. Everything is dependent upon each other. My nephew's a chef, so you have to have creative skills in the kitchen, good ingredients, and a good frying pan. So think of it that way. Bring all those together.
Thanks, John. Paul, how about you?
I think that the fundamental thing is to target correctly, and which in my mind means building out a platform and processes that are repeatable and sustainable. That is, I don't think there's such a thing as a steady state. I don't think there's such a term as done. And so you need to understand that while you're doing this conversion, you're building the infrastructure for the factory, for you to be able to do this again and again, and that every time you turn the crank, it's more efficient, right? The one thing I feel that has often been missing in these initiatives over the years has been the metric of what you're trying to get to. And oftentimes it's, I want great data quality, or I want self-service. And I believe a better metric is process efficiency. How long does it take to get something done? How many resources? How long to build a new model in my data science community? How long to add a new data set to my data warehouse? How long to, and even the latency of the data, how long to get real-time data into the hands of my decision makers? And then the most important in my view is how long to change the process, to change the data. The delta processing, I think, is the Achilles heel. So we can always engineer something perfect, and nothing ever stays that way. So that's what I would focus on, is process efficiency on a repeatable platform and processes.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Peter, to sort of close up the takeaways. Peter, you
Yeah,
are.
I know. I am on mute as well. I wanted to make sure you didn't feel bad being the only one.
Thank you, Peter.
I mean, it's hard to follow, right? These guys have brought up such great points, I guess. So I'll try to go in I'll say not a completely different, but a little bit of a different way. And again, go back to one of my earlier points is you really have evolved so much, so many things into a profession, into professionalism, right? You've professionalized the technology folks. You professionalize now, hopefully, the data folks. So this is, again, a recognition of this being a particular skill and not a specialized process, but an important process for the organization. So you want to professionalize that as well. In order to professionalize something, you need to make sure you've defined it. You've got team skills built around it. You've got a process, and you've got technology to support that. And if you've got all those ingredients, then the whole skill level and capability continues to rise, because they will then self-improve. And that is part of being a professional.
Peter, amen to that comment. And I think you earlier mentioned that, and I think a couple of the panelists did, this isn't just a point in time to address a M&A activity. It should be built into the general operating model of the business. I think that's your big point. Don't wait for the M&A. Be ready for it at all times and run your company that way. Listen, I want to thank all of the panelists and our audience for joining us today. I'd also like to thank the Intelliswift team for helping us organize and host this EDM webinar. If you'd like to learn more about today's discussion, you can connect directly with Fred and the Intelliswift team at the contact information on the screen. Everyone who registered, by the way, some housekeeping before you move on to your next call for the day. This webinar will actually have 2 outbound emails sent to everyone that registered. Within a few hours, you'll get a link to this recording and you can share it within your organization. We encourage you to do that. You can also share it to colleagues outside of your organization. This is an educational service, so please feel free to share this as widely as you feel appropriate. The second email you'll receive will be later this week. We'll take all of the Q&A and chat comments that we didn't get a chance to address today, and we will get the answers and put that into a transcript, and we will provide a copy of the slides and contact data for today. And this way you can get access to that as well. Finally, we encourage everyone to visit the EDM Council website, which is www.edmcouncil.org, to review past webinars and see all of the e-learning training programs, and to register for the free Data Vision conference. We are conducting one this week for the EMEA UK time zone, so Europe and UK, and it's Wednesday the 18th in the afternoon. And we have another Data Vision for Americas on the December 2nd date. Again, it's about 2.5 to 3 hours long, and we'll have panels like this one throughout those 2 hours. So it's all about practitioners. I think you'll find it very productive. So that concludes the webinar. Again, thank you for everyone's participation, and we do wish everyone a good day. Take care, everyone.